Hey, everybody, it's Jessica Levinson. I'm a professor at Loyola Law School and host of the podcast Passing Judgment. I'm in for Harry for a couple of days, and today I want to talk to you about the Supreme Court and ethics. As many of you may know, the Senate Judiciary Committee is going to hold a hearing talking about whether or not there should be a mandatory code of ethics that applies to the Supreme Court. Super briefly, there is a mandatory code of conduct for judges. It applies to all federal judges except 9. And it is permissive but not mandatory when it comes to those 9. And they are, of course, the members of the Supreme Court. That might sound like, well, how can that possibly be? They're the 9 most powerful judges. Of course, there should be a mandatory code of ethics that applies to them. And the answer is that, yes, that makes sense that there should be, but there are certain separation of powers and judicial independence concerns here. The other thing I'll say is if there's a mandatory code of ethics and it applies to the Supreme Court and a Supreme Court justice violates it, then who's going to enforce that? The Supreme Court, obviously, by name, is supreme. There's no body that looks over it, that oversees it. And so there are some kind of practical and administrability issues with respect to having a mandatory code of ethics. But let's back up for a second. Why is the Senate Judiciary Committee holding this hearing this week? Well, because, of course, as many of us know, Justice Clarence Thomas has gotten into some ethical hot water. That is because it was recently uncovered in a ProPublica report that he has accepted very luxurious gifts in the form of travel from a mega donor, a conservative mega donor, and that this donor through a company actually bought the house that Justice Thomas's mother now lives in, and she lives in it rent-free. Now, Justice Thomas, I think it should be stated, in my view, should have disclosed these as gifts on his disclosure form. It doesn't mean he can't accept any of these travel gifts, flying in expensive jets and being on yachts. It means that he should have disclosed that and provided us, the public, with some level of transparency. There is, in one part of the disclosure form, I think some genuine question about how much he had to disclose, but I think in other parts it was pretty clear that he probably did need to disclose. So what always happens when there's a scandal? Whenever there's a scandal, then the Senate or Congress acts. We tend to think of the Senate or Congress as places of inaction. Well, actually, whenever there's a scandal, that's the moment where you see hearings. And that's exactly what we are going to see this week. Now, the Chief Justice was invited by the Senate Judiciary Committee and Senator Dick Durbin, a Democrat, and the Chief Justice kind of politely said, no, that's okay, no thanks. And he cited 2 things that I talked about just a moment ago. One was the separation of powers, the idea that there are 3 co-equal branches. There's the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. And he's head of the judicial, and he essentially doesn't want to be hauled in by the legislative branch. He's also talking about this idea of judicial independence, that federal judges have lifetime appointments because they should be above the political fray. They should be making decisions based on the facts and the law, not based on what's popular or what the political branches might want. Now, Senator Dick Durbin wasn't particularly happy with Chief Justice John Roberts' response, and he basically wrote back, okay, but give me more information. The Chief Justice, in a very quick letter, said, I'm telling you a very little bit, not that much, and essentially, good luck to you. Obviously, he didn't use those words, but what are the repercussions here? What's really going to happen? So what's really going to happen is I do not think that there will be a mandatory code of ethics that applies to the Supreme Court. I think we'll talk about it. I think there'll be hearings, but I don't think it will actually happen. And what's going to happen with respect to Justice Thomas? My guess is nothing. That really the punishment for Supreme Court justices, if they so transgress the bounds of their job, if they so violate the norms, then the repercussion is impeachment. And I don't think that we will see this move to an impeachment proceeding And so I know that's not a particularly satisfying answer for a lot of people, but that's what I suspect will happen. I think there are a lot of reforms that are needed on the Supreme Court, and I don't think that we will see many of them because they're either very difficult or because we lack the political will. So that's the quick recap of what's going on with respect to the Supreme Court and that ethics hearing. And I will talk to you all soon.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.